Before we begin today's story, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because stories like this one remind us that behind every famous face is a very human struggle. Jim Parsons spent more than a decade becoming one of the most recognizable actors on television, loved by millions for a character that felt larger than life. From the outside, his career looked flawless, stable, and endlessly rewarding. He had fame, respect, and financial success most actors only dream about. But success has a strange way of hiding pain in plain sight. The truth is, the moment that changed Jim Parsons' life didn't happen during a contract negotiation or a dramatic argument on set. It didn't happen under bright studio lights or in front of an audience. It happened quietly, during one of the most overwhelming summers of his life, when exhaustion, grief, and fear collided at the worst possible time. This is not a story about walking away from fame. It is a story about realizing that no role, no matter how iconic, can protect you from the truths you've been avoiding. And once Jim Parsons faced that truth, everything changed. For over 11 seasons, Jim Parsons was the emotional and comedic anchor of The Big Bang Theory. Playing Sheldon Cooper required intense focus, precise timing, and relentless consistency. Sheldon wasn't just another sitcom character. He was a cultural phenomenon. Jim memorized pages of complex dialogue, scientific jargon, and rapid-fire jokes week after week without slipping. Cast members often spoke about his professionalism, his preparation, and his reliability. He rarely missed work. He rarely complained. He carried a character that could easily exhaust a lesser actor. To the world, Jim appeared invincible, but reliability often comes at a cost. The pressure to never fail, never slow down, and never show weakness slowly began piling up. By the time season 11 ended, Jim had already been running on empty for years without allowing himself to acknowledge it. He had built his identity around being dependable, and stepping back felt almost impossible. What no one saw was that beneath the calm exterior, cracks were forming. And once those cracks appeared, they spread quickly in ways he could no longer control. The summer of 2018 became the breaking point. Jim wasn't just filming The Big Bang Theory anymore. He had committed himself to the Broadway revival of The Boys and the Band, a demanding stage production that required emotional vulnerability night after night. 8 shows a week on Broadway alone would have been exhausting for any actor, but Jim didn't stop there. He was flying constantly between New York and Los Angeles, juggling rehearsals, performances, filming schedules, and press obligations. His body barely had time to recover, let alone his mind. Sleep became fragmented. Routine disappeared. Every moment felt scheduled, monitored, and owned by someone else. Still, Jim pushed forward, convincing himself that this level of exhaustion was normal, that he could endure just a little longer. He had built a career on endurance, after all. What he didn't realize was that the pace he was maintaining wasn't just unsustainable. It was dangerous. While work consumed nearly every hour of his life, something deeply personal was unfolding at home. Jim and his husband, Todd Spewak, had shared their lives with 2 dogs for many years. These weren't just pets. They were emotional anchors in a world filled with constant movement and pressure. One of those dogs, now 14 years old, was visibly declining. Jim felt the fear growing with every trip away from home. What if something happened while he was on a plane, on stage, or pretending to be someone else for an audience? The guilt became unbearable. He loved his work, but he couldn't escape the feeling that he was missing something irreplaceable. For the first time, the cost of his career wasn't abstract. It was painfully real. That fear opened an emotional door Jim had kept locked for years, and once it opened, it refused to close. The moment everything truly collapsed came during what should have been an ordinary morning. Jim had just returned from another exhausting flight. Before heading to a commercial shoot, he took his aging dog outside for a quick walk. One look was all it took. The dog's confusion, weakness, and pain were unmistakable. Jim froze. In that instant, years of emotional restraint fell apart. Todd reminded him of the crew waiting, the schedule already stretched thin to accommodate him. But Jim couldn't move. He cried openly, overwhelmed not by work stress, but by guilt. Guilt for being absent. Guilt for choosing obligations over presence. Guilt for realizing he no longer controlled his own time. That walk wasn't just about a dog. It was the moment Jim understood how far he had drifted from the life he actually wanted to live. The following day, Jim and Todd made the devastating decision to let their dog pass peacefully at home. Grief settled in quickly, heavy and unavoidable. But grief didn't pause Jim's schedule. Only days later, he returned to Broadway. During a performance, something went wrong. Mid-scene, Jim felt a sudden, sharp snap in his foot. The pain was intense, but he finished the show anyway. That choice spoke volumes. It revealed how deeply he had trained himself to ignore his own limits. At the hospital, staring at X-rays, a new fear emerged. What if the injury had been worse? What if it ended his ability to perform? For the first time, Jim saw his body as fragile, not invincible. And that realization terrified him. As Jim left the hospital, physically injured and emotionally exhausted, a darker thought surfaced. It wasn't irrational. It wasn't dramatic. It was rooted in memory. Jim's father had died suddenly at the age of 52. Jim had been only 26 at the time. Now, in 2018, Jim was 46. The math hit him hard. Only 6 years separated him from the age his father never reached. For years, Jim had avoided thinking about that number, but now it was unavoidable. What if time wasn't endless? What if he had far less time than he assumed? The fear wasn't about death itself. It was about how he was spending his life. Working constantly. Saying yes to everything. Leaving no space for rest, reflection, or joy. That realization followed Jim everywhere. On flights, on set, on stage. Every new request felt heavier than the last. He began questioning whether repeating the same rhythms on the same soundstage was how he wanted to spend the years he might not get back. Sheldon Cooper had given him everything, but now Sheldon felt like a shield he had been hiding behind. Jim didn't hate the character, he loved him, but love alone wasn't enough anymore. He needed space. Space to breathe. Space to grow. Space to choose his life, intentionally, instead of reacting to demands placed on him. When Jim finally sat down with Chuck Lorre, it wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices or ultimatums. Jim spoke honestly about his exhaustion, his grief, and his fear of time slipping away. Chuck listened. He understood immediately. They both knew the truth. The Big Bang Theory could not continue without Sheldon Cooper. Jim wasn't asking for more money or fewer episodes. He was asking for freedom. And that request came with consequences they both accepted. Telling the cast was even harder. These were people Jim had worked with for 12 years, people who had become family. The room filled with shock, sadness, and tears. Some felt blindsided. Others felt a strange sense of relief. Beneath the pain was understanding. They were all tired. Proud, grateful, but tired. Jim's decision forced everyone to confront a truth they hadn't said aloud yet. The journey was ending. When the news finally reached the public, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fans across the world were stunned, confused, and even angry. How could a show at the peak of its popularity suddenly decide to end? Media outlets rushed to fill the silence with speculation. Headlines screamed about money, ego, secret conflicts, and dramatic standoffs behind closed doors. One number kept circulating again and again, a rumored $50 million Jim Parsons had supposedly walked away from. The figure became so widespread that many people accepted it as fact. But Jim would later clarify that this narrative was never true. There was no dramatic rejection of a massive contract, no final offer placed on the table. Negotiations for future seasons had barely begun when he made his decision. The truth was far quieter and far more uncomfortable. Jim wasn't choosing between money and pride. He was choosing between continuing a life that was slowly breaking him and stepping into uncertainty with his health, time, and sense of self intact. As filming continued, the energy on set changed. There was laughter, but it was softer. Gratitude, but also mourning. Everyone knew these moments would never come again. As the final episodes were filmed, the cast began to experience something none of them had felt in years: awareness. Every rehearsal, every shared joke, every glance exchanged during tapping carried weight. These weren't just scenes anymore. They were memories being formed in real time. The actors lingered longer in dressing rooms, talked more openly about their fears and hopes, and reflected on how much of their lives had been shaped by this single show. For Jim, each scene felt like carefully closing a door rather than slamming it shut. He was afraid of regret, afraid that once the applause faded, he might question everything. Yet alongside that fear was a calm he hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, not relief, but peace. the kind that comes when you finally stop running. When the 2-hour finale aired, millions watched Sheldon Cooper thank his friends for their patience, their love, and their sacrifices. But for Jim Parsons, those words carried a deeper meaning. They weren't just lines in a script. They were his own farewell, spoken through a character who had shaped his life more than anyone could have imagined. When The Big Bang Theory officially ended in May 2019, Jim Parsons walked off stage 25 at Warner Brothers Studios, carrying something he hadn't felt in over a decade: freedom. No call sheets. No rehearsals waiting the next morning. No pressure to maintain a character voice recognized around the world. Many expected him to disappear for a while, to retreat from the industry that had demanded so much from him. But Jim didn't step away from acting. He simply stepped toward work that felt meaningful rather than obligatory. He continued narrating young Sheldon, remaining connected to the universe that had defined his career, but without the crushing responsibility of being its center. For the first time, he could choose projects based on curiosity and passion rather than momentum. He wasn't chasing success anymore. He was shaping a life that allowed space for rest, reflection, and growth. That freedom quickly translated into transformation. In Ryan Murphy's Netflix series Hollywood, Jim shocked audiences with a chilling performance that erased any lingering traces of Sheldon Cooper. Critics praised his ability to disappear into darker, more complex roles, proving what theater lovers had always known: Jim Parsons was never limited to comedy. In 2022, Spoiler Alert showcased his emotional depth in a deeply personal love story shaped by illness and loss, resonating strongly with audiences who saw echoes of his own life experiences. On stage, where his heart had always lived, Jim returned stronger than ever. Broadway productions demanded vulnerability instead of perfection, honesty instead of control. Each performance felt intentional, chosen, and earned. Looking back, Jim has openly said he never regretted his decision. The grief, the injury, the fear of time running out, those moments didn't destroy him. They redirected him. They forced him to listen before life forced him to stop. Jim Parsons didn't walk away from one of the biggest sitcoms in television history because of ego, money, or creative boredom. He walked away because life delivered a quiet but undeniable message: time is not guaranteed. No amount of fame, talent, or success can negotiate with it. For years, Sheldon Cooper had been his armor, shielding him from difficult truths about exhaustion, loss, and mortality. But eventually, even the strongest armor becomes too heavy to wear. By choosing himself, Jim didn't end a legacy, he preserved it. He ended an era not with bitterness, but with gratitude and clarity. His decision broke hearts, surprised millions, and rewrote television history. But it also gave him something far more valuable than another season ever could. It gave him his life back. And sometimes, the bravest ending is the one that allows a new beginning.